I've got a lot of thoughts on entrepreneurship. I've I'm a co-founder of a company called Ocular Technologies based out of Boston, and what we're trying to do is digitize the ophthalmic exam to create and actuate telemedicine for the eyes. Ophthalmology is already a very tech-heavy specialty, and I'm lucky to be kind of in the midst of a pandemic that's really pushing telemedicine forward, right? I would never wish a pandemic on anyone ever, but I started this company 3 years before the pandemic was really struggling, and then all of a sudden COVID hit, and so I can talk a little bit about that. I'm also a health policy wonk, and I think that comes into play. I'm really passionate about international global health, public health. That comes into play a little bit, and education comes into play. So happy to answer any questions that come up. Excited to be here, and thanks for having me, Brandon.
Great, thank you so much again. Nick, let's go on to you.
So I'm Nick. I'm a almost fourth year medical student at the University of Utah. I did my undergraduate at BYU in neuroscience, and many of you probably heard of the Onking stuff. It started as a YouTube channel, and then I kind of took over Zonky's deck, and I've been working on that since. And now working on software to make it so that Anki decks will update automatically, like in real time, and get better collaboration with students. Not like in terms of like being an entrepreneur, I just kind of fell into this. I wasn't looking to start a company. So you'll probably get better business advice from these other two, but I have a unique experience for sure.
Great, thank you so much. And Connor?
Hey everyone, my name is Conor Landgraf. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a med tech startup called Echo. We build cardiac monitoring and pulmonary monitoring devices, software, and algorithms. We build a product you may have heard of called Echo Core. It's a digital stethoscope product that has AI analysis of it for heart sounds and eventually for lung sounds. We are based in San Francisco Bay Area, and happy to chat about kind of our journey to entrepreneurship. Good to be with you all.
Great, thank you so much. So the first question we have is, at what point in your training or careers did you begin to start thinking about a business? Did you go in alone or did you have partners? And anyone is open to anyone.
It's a talkative group so far. So I think we all have a lot to say on this. I think what Nick said about entrepreneurship kind of just being a random thing that pops up in your life tends to be true. You tend to look at the world and see a problem. Being that we're all in medicine here on this call, it tends to be a medical problem that you're trying to solve. And you can tackle it many ways. You can try to go through research funding. You can try to do it alone. You can try to do this through private companies. You can do this through any number of avenues, right? But entrepreneurship is just one of many tools to tackle something in the world. And so for me, I didn't plan on starting a company. I actually tried to do the same thing I'm doing with my company, ask an NIH-funded grant for research. Unfortunately, I was a first-year resident, and they basically laughed me out of the building and said, look, you're too young, too early in your career for this. You're still in training. Just like wait a few years and be patient, young one. And I said, you know what, screw this. I'm doing this anyway. And I found a co-founder. I'm a physician, right? So at the time I was just a resident. I was a music major in college, so I have no engineering background. I found an optical engineer, and with that optical engineer, we founded the company, and we've been working on it ever since 2017. So that's how it all came to be, mainly out of necessity, out of a desire of a problem that I saw. We can get to that later if you want to, but that's kind of my story.
I can follow up on that with kind of how I fell into it and everything. I didn't like Anki as a medical student or as a pre-med student, decided to use it as a medical student. And I was helping my classmates with it, and it was taking a couple hours of my week every week. I was like, I can't keep doing this. So I made a couple of YouTube videos, I put my email at the end of those. And for about a year, I was just answering emails for free until it got to the point where I was getting between 20 and 30 emails a day. I was like, I can't keep doing this as a medical student. So we decided to charge for it. And then I realized, hey, I could put that money towards other projects to help medical students. and I could go on, but essentially that's what kept happening is I started a new project and then found a way to make money off of it and use that money to help in more ways. And that's essentially how it's continued. But I was never like, hey, I want to start a business and start making money. It started out of, hey, I want to help people. In terms of, did I have partners when I was starting this? It was mostly me at the beginning. And then, like I said, I realized I couldn't do this alone. And I got a couple of classmates in it, and then eventually had to start hiring people because there were just more and more things to do.
Yeah, and I think if you ask 10 entrepreneurs how they got started, you'll obviously come up with 10 different answers, and there may not be a whole lot of shared similarity between them. I think it's different for each person. For me, it was, I knew I wanted to start a company at some point. I feel like I had that entrepreneurship bug from a really early age, and it was something that I thought about a lot. I thought about kind of ways to strike it out on my own and build a business. And so it was something that kind of constantly was an itch in my brain. But I didn't know necessarily the problem that I wanted to work on, and I didn't know when I'd have the opportunity to do it. And in undergrad, basically ended up having this particular problem fall into my lap, got pretty excited about it, decided to do my grad thesis on it and continue to focus on this particular problem, and then ended up more or less kind of spinning the company out of grad school work into a standalone company. I think looking back on that process, the things that I think were really instrumental in helping us cross that chasm into becoming a real company. And I think what you'll find is that there are many, many people or many, many opportunities to do on-campus innovation or on-campus grants or startup competitions. But very few of those kind of make the full leap into a startup that makes a product and brings it to market. And so the things that I've found that help ensure that to de-risk that process are typically ensuring that, number one, you have co-founders. Everyone always says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, bring a friend or go along with others. And I think that's incredibly true for entrepreneurship. Having co-founders who are equally invested in the problem as you, who are willing to go the distance, is incredibly important. And it's very easy to give up if you're a sole founder when you realize that you don't have every single ingredient necessary for success. And then I think it's really important to find some way to make it risky for you. Find some way to put some substantial skin in the game. Otherwise, it's always going to be the thing that you do with your free time and your spare time, which is never going to be enough to help it reach that escape velocity. A startup is like a spaceship getting to orbit or something like that. You have to escape this really significant gravity well. There's a significant amount of drag on your startup that's preventing it from achieving escape velocity. And so putting some skin in the game so that you have risk in it is really important, especially in the early days, so that you can invest enough time and energy into it to see if it has what it takes to get to escape velocity.
I would just add to that and say that's definitely true, because I've been doing mine for 3 years, and it was just me making videos in my free time, and basically any money I earned from ads off YouTube and stuff, I wasn't doing anything with. And I mean, I'm not hardly even making money right now. It wasn't until COVID hit and we decided to make an actual online course that people pay for. And then recently I've had people working on ads, because my plan was, hey, I need to hire 3 full-time senior experienced software developers, which is going to cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. I need to have more income than just a couple $100 a month. And so now I'm at the point where I've invested, we've put in at least like $10,000 now. So now, like Conor was saying, now things are picking up. It's because I made that step. But for 2 years, it was growing, but it was never going to take off to something where I could live off that money, or that I could even pay somebody to live off that.
Yeah, you got to remember, you guys are in med school, right? So you obviously have some trajectory towards being a physician and taking care of patients, but that's always going to be a pull away from this other thing that you might do. And you need to find a way to devote sufficient time. And a part-time co-founder is not always enough to make something happen, even if you have co-founders around you. It is very difficult. This year, I have to dedicate half of my, Monday through Friday to the company, and only see patients 2 to 2.5 days a week, 2 days of clinic and a half day of surgery on average. And that's a huge, for just being like a brand new physician this year, basically, that's a huge hit to take. It decreases my salary considerably from the hospital, and my startup is not far enough along yet that I'm making any meaningful money from the startup, and I don't plan to for years. And so this is the skin in the game that Conor was talking about. You really have to be able to like commit to the idea. Another thing that I'll just say, and like this is one of the major themes that I hope you guys take away, there's a gazillion ideas in this world. And all of them are going to take just as much time to make into a company as anything else, whether they're good or bad, or they're your passion project or something you don't give any cares about. And so find something that you do care a lot about, find something that you actually research enough to ensure it is a good, feasible idea, because that really good, passionate idea will still take years to turn into a company. And so you might as well find the right idea from the outset.
Sorry, Dr. Armstrong, can I just follow up on that? Specifically because you said you founded it when you were in residency. So can you talk about, so I understand now where your time is more your own, maybe you could dedicate it and it's a financial hit. But what about like in residency when it's probably more of a time hit? Like how do you navigate that?
Yeah, it's essentially impossible. I mean, it took years of just trying to get the co-founder to do like almost 100% of the work, and I would provide help and stuff when I could. It did impact, my personal relationship with friends and family and stuff. I basically just did the company and this, and but in the end, I think it was what I cared about, and it's worth it. But it's definitely not easy. Yeah.
Did you ever get any pushback from your like attendings or from your program?
Well, I made it clear to my co-founder and to everyone around me that patient care came first. And so I never shirked my call responsibilities. I never shirked the patient care responsibilities. I showed up and did all my work in the hospital all the time. In any downtime, I became very efficient at answering company emails or going through and like finding projects that I could work on that didn't require me to be in the office all the time. And so I tried to help where I could to be a meaningful contributor to the team. But I mean, there were times where it was essentially impossible to contribute,
I can actually comment on that point as well. I've been doing my third year clinicals right now, which are extremely taxing, between, being in the hospital 60 to 80 hours a week and then trying to study on top of that. And then we had a baby on my internal medicine rotation. So I haven't really had time to do much this year, and I've had to rely on people. Like I said, I've had to hire people to do things for me. And then this other company the second company that we started is a partnership 50-50 with me and him. He's a software engineer. And I basically said, this year I can, look at the finances and pay a bill if I need to, but it's completely on you. And that was just, I had to lay that out and make them understand, kind of like Dr. Armstrong was saying, they have to understand that you're that busy and there's nothing you can do about it.
Sorry, again, I have another follow-up. This time for Conor. Can you talk about it from being the non-medical person, let's say, with the physicians you work with?
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe I'll ask or answer another question first. I think people always ask, like, when do I know I've found the right idea? And I think for most people, the advice is you don't have to find the idea that you're incredibly passionate about from day one. Like, I think many people think that they're going to find the problem that they are just meant to solve. And I think the reality is, like, there are lots and lots of problems that need to be solved that aren't incredibly inherently interesting from the outside, but get interesting as you dive into them. So I think number one, don't discount your ability to like fall in love with a problem and obsess over it if that's your personality, so to say. It's unlikely that you're going to find a problem and be like, this is my life's purpose to solve this problem. Like that, you don't really have many of those moments, I think, for the most part. Number two, do expect that it's going to take a decade. Like, I think just go into problems with the expectation that you're going to spend 10 years working on it, especially in healthcare, because that's how long it takes to bring something to clinical practice through a regulatory approval, et cetera. Like unless it's some, piece of software that doesn't require significant clinical adoption, you could probably move faster than that. But even then, it's a safe bet to think about it in kind of 10-year long time spans, which is a long time. I think as a as a non-MD, we tried to surround ourselves with MDs as much as possible to get the perspective on the product and try to understand it through their lens. MDs and non-MDs see the world very differently, especially when it comes to building products and the things that the way you design a product for a non-clinical audience is very different from the way you design it for a clinical audience. So your intuition will oftentimes lead you astray. That's what we found is like your intuition as a lay engineer or as a lay product designer is probably wrong when it comes to trying to solve a problem in the way that an MD is going to think about that. So you have to kind of try to tear up your playbook as much as possible and really rely on customer and user feedback. That's really, really important. And it's different from consumer app. Consumer app, it's pretty likely that your designer can intuit a good response or intuit what's going to be useful, and that's really different than in healthcare.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those pieces of advice. It's really appreciated. If anyone else would like to speak up, you guys can either raise your hand or if you don't want to do that, you can drop it in the chat too, and it can be asked there. But we can move on to the next question for now. So professional setting can be different when comparing medicine and business. How best can medical professionals prepare themselves for business norms, cultures, structures, etc.?
I can start with this one because I've learned a lot over the last couple of years. And the biggest thing is, like I said, I started this I wanted to help people. And I was thinking, I just want to help people. I don't want to rip off med students. So I don't want to charge them for anything, right? We already pay out the wazoo for our tuition, and then all these other companies are charging us. And so I was kind of against that from the beginning. Like I just wanted a couple $100 on the side, and that was it. I could do little projects here and there until I had this idea where I was like, I need senior software engineer developers. I'm going to need thousands of dollars, and this is really going to benefit medical students. And at that point, I realized I had not been running this like a business. And because of that, I was not in a position to be able to help people. And so I think if you go into this and you want to start something, you don't have to have the mindset of I'm starting a business and thus I want to earn money for myself and become rich. That's not true. When you start a business, you need to earn money in order to grow that business, in order to help more people. So it can be just like medicine where you're trying to help people. And in fact, the better you understand the business principles and the profit and income and hiring and all of that stuff, the more success you're going to have and the more people you're going to be able to help. And it wasn't until the last year that I've actually started, trying to be more of a business, because prior to that, I didn't think, I just was against that. So that's kind of my thoughts, at least on this topic.
As a medical person, I mean, I am really bad at baseline at business stuff. I'll just throw it out there. I did not have an MBA. I had essentially no idea how a lot of this stuff worked, but I knew that I wanted to make it happen. I was fortunate that the optical engineer also was in business school. And so he provided some of the expertise I certainly learned along the way. Just a lot of the cultural norms, the fact that, it's very normal for people outside of medicine to meet between 9 to 5. And that's not something you can do easily as a resident. Like that's just hard enough, let alone things like Gantt charts and budgeting and trying to meet with investors and creating pitch decks and trying to it's all very different from what you experience. But I will say the 180-degree lens that you should look at this from is that you've already been in medicine. You've already been thrown into different clinical scenarios, different classes on the turn of a dime, needed to learn a lot in a fast pace without a lot of prep and a lot of background in it. And so you have the experience and the knowledge and the brain power to make it happen. If you're going to do this, you should know that you're going to have to spend just as much time, effort, and energy to learn this other stuff too, just like you did in medical school and like you will in residency if you go that route. And it's not easy. It will take a lot of time and effort.
Yeah, I think there are many different types of companies. There are side projects that you want to get to cash flow positive so it can pay its bills, but you're just passionate about that particular website or software tool or open source project you want to build. There are companies that you want to bootstrap and you never want to raise a dime of investor money and you want to try to get it to profitability and let it be a business that you have full control over and get to work on for a long period of time. And then there may be venture-backed companies where you're saying, I want to own a very small piece of this, but I want it to be massive, and I'm going to take on significant amounts of venture capital to make it achieve that hyper growth that's going to make it very valuable. So I think it's important to decide directionally what you want to build first and kind of make that conscious decision, because that affects everything you do. It affects whether you bring on someone else to work on the business. It affects whether you think about you want to take on some investor capital to increase the velocity of growth. And it's okay if that changes over time, but it's important to be explicit about that trade-off you're making, so that you can best focus on that particular outcome that you're trying to optimize for. And there's nothing wrong if you say it's a side project, and then after a long time we've shown that there is potential here and we want to raise some venture capital to explode it to the next level. That's fantastic. But it is important to kind of go through that process of being explicit about what you want, the outcomes that you're hoping for from that business.
Yeah, I can give a bit of example there. So when I was in med school, I started something, technically it's a company, it's a 501c3, so it's a nonprofit, called the Providence Alliance of Clinical Educators, where we try to build these virtual textbooks for essentially middle school students and elementary school students to focus on like very particular medical concepts, but illustrate them almost like a Grimm's fairy tale kind of a thing. Not quite so dark, but like I was the illustrator because I was a music and art major back in the day. And then someone else would write the stories and we would kind of highlight them and provide them free across the country. So we had people who would like go email schools, email teachers and be like, hey, if you're interested, you're a science teacher, use this if you want, it's free, whatever. That required like essentially no money, just our time. The opposite side of the spectrum is that one of my classmates in medical school started recently a pharmaceutical company and has needed to raise millions and millions and millions of dollars to get this thing even operational. They've hired major scientists from other pharmaceutical companies to get these things. They have to license IP and different drugs that are already kind of like in the pipeline at these academic centers. Like that's that's like two opposite ends of the spectrum. I'm smack dab in the middle with a medical device, which is its own headache. With regulation and stuff, but like there's a gazillion different types of companies, and there's nothing wrong or right about each one. It's just that each one requires different amounts of assets, resources, and speed and timing and stuff. So I totally agree with Connor.
Awesome, thank you. And I think Austin and Alex have a question.
Thanks, Brandon. This question is kind of directed at Conor and Dr. Armstrong. Dr. Armstrong, I think you alluded to earlier in your introduction about how COVID and the pandemic had kind of created more of a market for telehealth and your product. And I wonder if both of you, and perhaps Nicholas as well, if you guys could kind of address how exactly COVID has affected demand for your products, and what you guys see as the future of telehealth going forward in the next 5, 10, 15 years.
I'll let Connor or Nick go first. I have a lot of thoughts, so I'm going to try to see if they can cover some of my stuff.
Yeah, I can answer first. So because we build tools that can enable physicians to conduct remote exams, so remote auscultation, remote ECG in real time for their patients, we benefited pretty substantially from just additional need for telehealth, synchronous and asynchronous telehealth tools over the last year. And it was really exciting to see kind of telehealth emerge as a significant source of visits and a significant, and the home become a significant place of care. I think what we saw was in most systems, a massive pivot to delivering the majority of care via telehealth in March, April, May, June, July last year. And then we've now seen a return to some level of normalcy. The level of normalcy that it now is, though, is about 3-4x what it was before the pandemic. So, it may have been 2% virtual visits in January of 2020, and we're probably now at 10, maybe 15% virtual visits in some case. I think we're going to keep that plateau. And I think the model in the future is going to be one of a hybrid in-person and virtual experience. A lot of that depends upon, the economic incentives that payers and health insurers create, though. The economic incentives that were kind of unleashed because of the pandemic were really substantial to allow physicians to, or systems to pay or to bill for care that was conducted remotely. And so that unlock is still in place. But if payers and insurance companies pull back on reimbursing for telehealth care, then we could see a really significant kind of return to very low utilization. I don't think that's going to happen. My prediction is that most patients have found that they prefer some care to be delivered remotely. There's a lot of benefit to that. There's a lot less friction. And so I think we're going to probably stick at around 10 to 15% virtual visits would be my prediction.
Nick, do you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, COVID didn't hit me a ton because everything I've done is online, online courses, online tutoring, things like that. So it didn't hit me a ton, although I will say our YouTube videos went up a ton when COVID hit. So that was a nice perk. But otherwise, I think these guys are going to have more valuable thoughts on this question.
I mean, I don't know. I think the fact that you had, you were in the virtual space when virtual was most needed is in and of itself important, like right place, right time. So I mentioned in the beginning that I'm a health policy wonk. It's a bit hard to describe how much of a health policy wonk I am because in med school, I got involved in the AMA, became president of the chapter of the AMA. I became the head of the med students on the national level of the AMA. And then now I'm on the board of trustees of the AMA. I'm the only trainee on the board of trustees of the AMA. So I love this stuff. I live for it. And a lot of what Conor said is absolutely true. You have to understand kind of it's useful to understand the overall environment that you're working in from a regulatory space, from a legislative space, even from like a norms space, like values. What is the value system of America and how does that interact with what you're going to do? So all this stuff matters, especially in healthcare, where physicians don't want to provide bad care. They may be a little leery of new technologies and new modes of care without it being proven out. So now we have telemedicine, right? So the stats are that before COVID, Medicare paid 0.1% of its percentage of visits telemedicine wise. At the peak of the pandemic, it went up to 18%. That's a massive influx of telemedicine visits and lack of in-person care. Of all the specialties of medicine that adopted telemedicine, ophthalmology was the worst of all of them. And so I thought at the beginning of the pandemic, I've been working on this project for 3 years. All of a sudden, everyone's going to want my product because everyone's going to use it. It's going to go pure virtual. Well, guess what? I was wrong. So people eventually went back to in-person care within a few months. And now I'm carving out the space of telemedicine within ophthalmology, kind of with COVID in my sales, but really trying to carve a new niche still. It never really took off in a massive way in the field of eye care. I'd also say that you have to understand that you can do other things to help your any company that you have come to fruition. So in the world, people come up with ideas. Scientists will work on a product that's NIH funded for like 10 years, 15 years. It's their PhD, it's their focus of their lab. And then all of a sudden, a decade later, it might become a commercially viable idea and it's ready for the market. And then you have to go through all that stuff and then it comes out the other side. It's this long process. All along the way, people like the FDA will start to say, okay, fine, like this kind of stuff, we'll start to consider telemedicine and new devices and AI. And all of a sudden that's like its own thing. But that wasn't there even like 5 years ago, So the regulatory space, the policy space, the legal space. One thing that you might not recognize because you're in the midst of it is medical education, right? Like you need to train physicians to be ready for this stuff. And so here at Harvard Med, I created a telemedicine curriculum for the ophthalmology residents. And we're doing a pre and post test to see if it actually did anything to improve uptake and skill. And I'm preparing, hopefully, the next generation of eye doctors for this telemedicine care that they currently aren't doing or not doing well. And so there's many ways you can impact it. I'm applying for clinical trial funding through the NIH to try to study telemedicine and ophthalmology and prove that the outcomes are sufficient and non-inferior to in-person care. That's important, right? Like if I'm an eye doctor across town, I might be skeptical that telemedicine is worse care for my patients and no one's proven that it's safe. So you need the science, you need the regulators, you need the policymakers, you need the education piece. All these kind of come to bear. I know this is a long-winded answer, but basically COVID changed everything for me. Austin, and it's a great question because it's still changing everything, it seems, and there's a lot of unknown because of it, but I think there's a lot of opportunity. And my company, while it was at the right place at the right time, we still didn't hit the nail on the head, and we're still working on it.
I'll add on to the question before about, how to think about from a business perspective. And I think one of the most valuable thing, and one of the things MDs can do, is understand the economics of healthcare in addition to understanding the clinical care, especially if you want to be an entrepreneur in medical devices or in biotech or pharma. Healthcare economics are notoriously complex, and the health in most med schools and med students and even physicians, I think, have a relatively limited understanding of the gears behind how coding works and how the actual payments work in healthcare. And so those drive incentives in many situations, unfortunately. I mean, the reality is, like, physicians, health systems have to get paid. There has to be revenue to support clinical operations. And so spending time as much as possible understanding medical coding, understanding what gets paid for, understanding how CPT codes get created and what those legislative structures look like and how rates are set, I think is very valuable if you want to become an entrepreneur at some point. Because once you understand those, it unlocks a lot of insight into how to build good products for the healthcare system that we have. I think building good products for patients and for patient care is important, but unfortunately, you do have to understand the economics of healthcare to figure out how someone gets paid to deliver that test, how someone gets paid to do that procedure, which makes a big difference when you're selling into health systems.
Awesome. And I had a question to add on to that, Connor. Do you have any resources you recommend, or Dr. Armstrong or Nick too, about just learning about those aspects of business for medical students? Because we don't really learn much of that here. So
I know a lot of MBA programs have a healthcare coding for MBAs type of class, or MPH programs, I think, may have classes like that. So if there are online resources or online free courses that may be accessible, I'd recommend reaching out and trying those. There's a lot of resources around just healthcare coding in general that are accessible online, but I don't think I have a golden ticket resource, knowledge base, or resource there.
I think there tend to be groups of physicians in every state, county, and across the nation that are passionate about the stuff we're talking about, whether it's business or healthcare billing and coding and policy and stuff. So what I'd recommend is get involved in your county and state med society if you can. Get involved in the AMA. Those are some low-hanging fruits. If you know what specialty you're going to be going into already, just pony up with that specialty society and see if they have any opportunities. There tend to be lectures and talks and events where you can just go and listen to different aspects of it. Obviously, it's very complex and hard to get in like a bite-sized snippet. You could do an MBA, you could do an MPH. Alternatively, technically with this stuff, you could just do it and start asking around and rely on peers and experts in the field. I do have a book I recommend. I'm going to grab it. I have it over here. And it does give a pretty good review of the overall healthcare system. I think there's a newer version of it now, but it's called the Healthcare Handbook. So that's one. A second one is called, it's by the AMA, and it's in its second edition now. It's called Health System Science. And this is like the piece of healthcare that you don't learn about in med school. It's all the other stuff. But it's all like in one book, right? Like it's all here. And it's also online, I think. I think it's all free too. So just look that up if you want. That stuff's pretty good.
I can't speak directly to the like healthcare system stuff because I haven't gotten into that, but I didn't know how to start an LLC or what was involved in, switching to an S corp and the taxes involved in that, and then the legal stuff when you have to like, copyright and trademark and things like that. And just as I'm doing it, especially if you're going to be a medical student or resident or somebody, you're going to be busy. I kind of just tackled the problems as I hit them. So, when I needed to start a business, then I just Googled the heck out of it really until I understood the topic and what it was. And then eventually I was like, okay, I understand most of it. And then I called a lawyer, and because I understood most of it already, I only needed like a 15-minute phone call, which wasn't very expensive and was more helpful. So you just kind of like, as you're getting into this, whatever field you're in is going to be I'm sure what Conor and Dr. Armstrong are dealing with are similar, but also very different. And so you just kind of figure it out as you're working on whatever you're doing.
I belabored how to set up my company for like months. I went through LegalZoom in the end and just like put it together that way. But I will, like, that was just the beginning. Obviously, things took multiple different turns in the future. Not sure I would do that again. But there is generally at most academic facilities, if they have a law school, there tend to be free clinics where you can talk to law students who are overseen by professionals who can give you advice and start to set things up. Sometimes they will go through the whole process of setting up a company and things for you as part of their training, and you get to benefit on the other side. They may not have the years of experience that you want if you're setting up something really complicated, but it's certainly not a bad place to start getting free advice.
There's also another great resource called Stripe Atlas. Stripe is a payment processor. They're a Silicon Valley-based company that does online payments, and they have a program called Atlas that handles incorporation. So that's like setting up a legal entity and then doing the first set steps of creating your legal structure. And I believe they have very affordable rates. They also provide a number of other resources. So if you're thinking about setting up, I think it's specific for corporations. I don't know if it supports LLCs. Probably should look into that. But it's worth just a quick review because they have some great resources there. I think the 2-second summary is, if you want to start a company and bootstrap it and it's really going to be a side project for you, an LLC is a great way to do that in many situations. And then if you want to set up a company that raises venture capital at some point that may get acquired, then a corporation is probably the right structure. That's the extremely lightweight answer that probably isn't correct in many situations, but it's the 10-second overview.
Awesome, thank you. And I just want to make sure everyone else has a chance to ask their questions too. I still have a list of questions, but if anyone has anything that they want to ask, feel free to ask it right now.
I have a question with regards to medical data. So this question might be mostly for Conor, but maybe Dr. Armstrong or Nick, I'm not sure. But what has your experience been partnering with like medical institutions, physicians, and trying to use like existing healthcare data for your products? I imagine, Conor, for your AI, you probably have to train on some sort of on a lot of sounds. So how do you go about making those partnerships?
Yeah, I'm happy. Recording started again. All right. There's a lot of different ways to access healthcare data sets that range from really straightforward to incredibly challenging. I'd say hospital legal departments and health system legal departments are incredibly slow moving and extremely conservative in how they use everything. Not surprisingly, I mean, they should be, but it does make getting data access harder than pulling teeth in most situations. What you will find is that there is a range where your large tier 1 academic institutions, the names that you'd immediately think of in med schools or in healthcare systems, are typically some of the most conservative as well. And the most protective of their own patient data. And then as you move towards like regional clinics, cardiology practices, primary care practices, they may have significant sources of data as well, but they obviously don't have the same institutional bureaucracy above them. And so it can be a lot easier to get access to data that way. I think in any data access situation, there's a lot of complexities to navigate around ensuring that you have appropriate de-identification of data, that you have appropriate controls in place. We've even seen situations where health systems take the company employees, make them contractors of the health system, train them so that they can authorize access to the medical records. And so then the contractor who's working for both entities at the same time is then, allowed to somehow get access to the clinical data sets that they need, can de-identify them, and then, allow the company to access them. It is very, very complex, and there's no simple answer there. It varies quite a bit from institution to institution. But in general, I would say the more prestigious, the larger the institution, the harder it is to work with in almost any capacity. And that the smaller clinics, the regional practices, the community health systems are far less bureaucratic, much less expensive, have probably more representative patients in many situations, to your everyday patient population. And I think are underutilized as clinical study sites, as data partners, etc. I would say there's a lot of situations where you don't want to go with the marquee institution, the name brand institution, because they're just going to make your life really hard.
Yeah, I don't think I have much more to add to that. I mirror that experience.
There's many institutions that we won't name that have very, very bad reputations in working with startups. They never get anything done.
All right. So another one of the questions on the forum: how do you blend an interest in business or entrepreneurship with the demands of medical school, residency, medical practice, and where can interested individuals begin? I guess you guys answered the last part of it, but yeah, how do you? Oh wait, sorry. Yeah, I think we finished that one already. How do you balance running a business with other parts of your personal life and other jobs and responsibilities?
Very carefully. It takes a lot of time. It always takes more time than you think it's going to take, and then it takes even more than that, and then you just have to keep dedicating more and more time and effort to things as they grow, as teams grow. The tasks you're in charge of change as things continue to progress and grow and move to different stages. I think you have to be very purposeful and mindful and transparent along the way. If you are going to do any sort of clinical practice, you need to be very upfront with any employer or with any practice that you're joining down the road and say, look, this is something that's really important to me. I know this is going to take a decent amount of my time, so I'm only looking to work X number of days. Take it or leave it, that's fine. I won't have any hard feelings if that doesn't work for you. There's a good number of eye doctors that have come out of my training program that have gone on to do that, and they work maybe 2.5 days a week clinically, and the rest of their time is spent on their startup. And again, if the startup is doing well, they'll get paid also by the startup and won't have to take much of a financial hit. Otherwise, they will have to take a financial hit for a while. When you're in residency, I think that when you're applying to residency specifically, may not always be the best time to bring it up in a residency interview, just so that you know. Not that it's a bad thing that you are interested in innovation and entrepreneurship, but if you have something that's going to take significant amount of time away, or perceived as potentially taking significant amount of time away from a residency program demand of your time and effort and skill, then they may not look favorably upon that. Now, they may very well. I think that certain programs are different. Like in Stanford, I think there's a lot of residencies in multiple specialties that love the fact that people kind of invested in that. But at the end of the day, you're only there for a limited amount of time to learn that specialty, and you need to be the best doctor you can be for your patients. So you really do need to dedicate yourself wholly to that patient care. And because of that, it is incredibly difficult to balance.
So I've been doing everything through med school. I didn't have the convenience of telling my employer that I only wanted to do med school for 3 days a week. That would have been nice. But what I found works really well is I need to be really transparent and clear with my wife, because she obviously wants my time. when I'm not studying and stuff. But I would just in little chunks, like I'm going to do half an hour today and half an hour tomorrow. And that's it. Like, for example, today I'm doing this meeting. And so I'm not going to do anything else. This is all I would do on this side of things. And I just am very clear with that. And a lot of times, honestly, it means me waking up at 5 a.m. on a Saturday morning to get things done so that I can spend the rest of the time with family members or friends or whatever we're doing. And breaking it up in little chunks like that, having a very clear to-do list, but also realizing, because I know you guys listening are med students, that I'm not going to be able to get everything done as fast as I want it to get done. And I have to be okay with that. It's just kind of like, I'm okay with a very slow growing thing because I have to be. And then now that I'm at a point where I have some income, it was hard for me to realize this. Was kind of like what Conor was talking about with the risk. I had to say, okay, I'm going to put this money into other people and hire them and make them do the work since I'm busy. And actually, one of the hardest parts for me was that I had a little bit of income for those people, but I couldn't justify paying them because I would be paying them to do something that wasn't going to earn me more money. And so I had to find a way to get some money so that I could pay people and they could be doing something that would earn money for me, if that makes sense. That's probably what I would recommend if you're a med student or a resident or whatever, is you have to find ways to make your time very limited and allow other people to do the work for you. And some of that can be work that's not earning money, but some of it has to be work that can fund their position essentially.
Yeah, I think much of the same, work. If you're really investing in your time in a startup, you probably won't have much work-life balance. And if you're a med student, you probably don't have any work-life balance as it is. So I think starting a company in med school is really, really challenging if you're really trying to see it grow in a hockey stick fashion, as we say, or grow like a rocket ship. But that said, I think the flip side is true, which is that you always have time to practice thinking like an entrepreneur. And when I say that, I mean thinking in a problem-solving fashion, trying to say, what would it look like if I took this really small problem and tried to turn it into a business? And I think when you frame the world from that perspective, it helps you constantly identify where are the small pain points, where are the unmet needs that I could think about eventually starting a company in. And it's meant to be like a constant kind of iterative process. Like once you have that framework, you kind of constantly say, I've noticed this inefficiency, and now let me think about what a business would look like if I wanted to create a company to solve this particular problem. And so if you try to kind of train your mind to think in that perspective, then you don't have to be committed to something. You don't have to take an idea and launch a company out of it, but you can just be constantly trying to develop that muscle memory to help you identify where unmet needs are that could be solved by a company at some point. And then when you are at the right stage in life, when you're out of med school, then you can really be primed to think about where potential startup opportunities are. And I think, especially as an entrepreneur, ideas are completely valueless. Ideas are not worth a dime. Execution is where all of the value is. And so, I think as an entrepreneur, never be afraid to tell someone an idea you're thinking about. Never be afraid to tell someone about a startup, problem that you want to solve, because that will just help you understand how other people think about that same problem, whether they share the same perspective as you. And that'll help you kind of hone your own senses about what makes a product good, or what makes an idea good, or what makes a problem worth solving.
That last piece is so true. I did not know that for a long time. I held my idea close to my chest. I would only tell people kind of in secret, and I was worried, like, should I get them all to sign like an NDA, like even like close friends, just in case they're going to steal it? One thing you have to realize, like, everyone in this world is busy. Everyone has a job. Everyone's like working on something they care about, hopefully. And you guys are obviously busy in med school. It's not like if you talk to your med school peer that they're going to have the time to all of a sudden start up this startup that you didn't have time to start. It doesn't work that way. Unless you happen to talk to like the head of innovation at like a massive tech startup, and that happens to be like the coolest, best idea. They may want to take it, but like that would be pretty rare, I'd say. So just, be liberal. The idea that you come up with at first may morph into 15, 20 different iterations before you come to something that means that may be worth like taking forward. And you want it to die early if it's going to die, and you want it to not work if it's not going to work. instead of wasting 3 years on something, you would waste like maybe a few months on it to find out it's not going to be that viable thing. So just talk about it, do it, get people involved, get stakeholders to give their insights. It's really valuable.
I had to learn that lesson as well.
I mean, I have an aside on that. It's related. Connor, I don't think you and I have ever talked before, but I met Jason Bellet when I was a fourth year med student. He contacted me when I was kind of in charge of the med student section of the AMA, and I was
Wow.
a consultant for ECO. I guess technically I'm still on your consultant list somehow, but
That
like,
is too funny. Small world.
it is. I mean, I think that just goes to show that like even years ago, you guys were reaching out to people who were the purchasers of new stethoscopes, med students, to try to get to see like what matters. How do you pick your stethoscope? How does the med school market stethoscopes? Like who comes in and talks about like all that stuff. Like I just think you guys were, that just goes to show that it's important to like talk to people, ask questions, and like get a lot of advice and keep pivoting if you need to.
That's hilarious. Small world.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you so much for that insight. We're heading towards the end here, so I just wanted to make sure everyone gets to ask and say what they wanted to. So this includes the panelists. If you want to bring up a topic that hasn't been brought up yet that you think might be a benefit to the med students here, feel free to go ahead. Same for the other people listening. If you wanted to ask anything, now would be the time.
If you, I want other people to raise their hands, but one thing that wasn't brought up that's really valuable to know from the outset is that choosing your co-founder is also super important. And I think that more so, like there's a lot of good hard workers in this world, but I'd say the thing that matters the most in my experience, and I still have a lot of experience to learn, so don't take this as gospel or anything, but like understanding that your values are aligned and what you're looking for out of the company. If somebody, let's say hypothetically, one person in the company wants to like grow super fast and get venture funding and be like self-sustainable and like sell to a bigger company in a few years, whereas the other person wants to keep it small, kind of bootstrap, make it smaller, but like really have an impact and control over where things go and not have investors. Those two people are going to be at odds in terms of how the company goes day to day, and it really changes the trajectory. And make sure that people, not everyone that comes into a company is passionate about the project itself. You know, like I'm in eye care. Not every person that works is like as passionate about eyes as an ophthalmologist is. Some people are passionate about the engineering side of it, or some people are passionate about the business side. But, you know, trying to find people that kind of mesh well and spending time on that piece is really important.
I'd probably add, and this may be obvious, but discussing who's going to do what and who's going to take what piece of the pie and stuff like that should happen sooner than later. You know, like I said, I was never planning on turning this into a business, and our discussion on that topic actually started much later into the project than it probably should have. You know, you should say like, this is what we want to do and talk about it early on, and not just, you know, who gets what percent of the pie, but like very clear expectations as to what you and your co-founders or partners are actually going to be doing and who's going to be responsible for what. So that's not a discussion down the road and nobody feels like they're doing more than they agreed to or that kind of thing.
I think I'd just say as well, finding co-founders who have complementary skill sets to your own is incredibly valuable. Find people who are different than you, but bring specific skills that are necessary for the company to succeed, whether that's a business background, whether that's software. It's really important that there's as limited overlap as possible between competencies among founders. You don't want people who have the same skill set because they don't bring kind of additive value to the table.
I have maybe a last question, if kind of like that kind of theme. What's like the best piece of advice you got along the way?
I would probably say, if you make a quality product, the followers, the money, everything like that is going to follow. If you come out the door wanting to make the money and get the followers, then you're going to focus more on that than the quality of the product. If you have something that's very valuable, it may not sell very quickly at first, but then eventually, once you're able to advertise and stuff, they have algorithms. There are people who spend their whole lives working on things like that. You will be able to sell it, but having a true like quality product is what's going to make it sell. Otherwise, it will be a very short-lived product.
I mean, I can't think of any like sage pieces of advice that came along the way. So what I'll answer with instead is the people that have helped me the most are the people that are like the naysayers that I can go to, that I trust and are not mean, like not asking questions to be mean, but are asking questions because they actually are like thinking through the problem with me. And people are like, well, have you really thought about how this coding works? Like, well, what happens in this situation? Like, what about these regulations? And they'll like walk through it with you and really be like a sounding board, and kind of a confidant when it comes to a lot of this stuff, you know. The people that are asking those questions have helped the most.
Yeah, I think. Sorry. Crying baby here. I think the things you learn more from failure than you do from success. So there's a lot of value in failing because it shows you how you understand retrospectively where your thinking was wrong, and you know how to do better in the future. And then sorry, I got an interruption. And I think the final piece of advice is you always want to launch before your product is mature. If you launch with a perfectly mature product, you're going to miss the mark because you know you have to iterate a lot. So launch early before it's ready. Launch with something that you're ashamed of, to be honest, so that you can waste as few resources as possible to be able to pivot, because you know you'll have to pivot and change a number of times after you get your product in the hands of your first customers. Launch with the most basic, most prototype, most poorly coded, most limited feature set possible, so that you can learn what you need to change about the product.
Yeah, I think that's certainly true for a lot of the like tech heavy stuff, or the AI or the software stuff. If you're doing pharma, make sure the drug works first.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and thank you so much for our amazing panelists for taking the time to speak to us and give us their advice and insights. I see that Dr. Armstrong has dropped his email in the chat if you guys want to hit him up after. I'll ask Nick and Connor if you guys want to do that. I can send an email to the attendees after to with the recording. So all this will be recorded. It will be sent to the email that you signed up for. And thank you so much for coming, everyone. It was really great to have you.
Thanks, Brandon.
Thanks for the opportunity to participate. This is a lot of fun.
I agree. This was fun. Thanks for organizing, Brandon.